Story 1. Neighbor said, "It's unfortunate that your solar panels will be producing less electricity now that daylight saving time has ended." Story 2. When I was in high school, the science teacher taught the class that a kilometer was longer than a mile. I thought it was just a mistake, so I suggested that she accidentally said it backwards. She insisted that she went to college, so she was smarter than me. I showed her the search result, and she claimed to know more than the search engine because of her education. I tried to reason with her, saying that when you're driving, your car displays kilometers per hour and miles per hour, and the kilometers per hour number is higher than the miles per hour number at the same speed. Doesn't that imply that kilometers represent a smaller distance since you travel more of them in an hour? She responded, "No, kilometers per hour is higher because it's longer, so you need to drive more of them to go the same speed." The next day, she told me she looked it up at home and admitted I was right, but she never corrected the class and continued to tell them that a kilometer was longer than a mile for the rest of the year. Everyone believed her. Story 3. I had a teacher once tell me that Blackbeard the pirate was an imaginary figure. I, a huge history enthusiast at the time, told them he was real and his name was Edward Teach. They replied, "Yes, in the stories that is his name." Story 4. I once had to convince a 32-year-old that we are floating in space. He thought we were sitting on some kind of stand, but I don't even know. Story 5. That the planet is flat and birds are not real. However, I encounter some people who are completely out of their minds. Story 6. My cousin has given me a couple of good stories. I was drinking from a slanted wine glass when I went to take a sip, and she bolted out of her chair, telling me to stop because she thought I was going to spill wine on myself. She also mentioned that reindeer have antennae. She seriously looked at my brother and suggested he should put an air conditioner on his motorcycle. She said she doesn't like wearing socks because she can't feel the floor. Once, she said she wants to marry a man who has the same last name as her first name, but with an O. For example, Riley O'Reilly or Jenny O'Jenny. At the store, she bought a kiwi when she meant to get a grapefruit. She mentioned that the signs were really close together, and she had never had a grapefruit before. She was buying one to try it. When she was checking out, the cashier scanned it, and it showed up as a kiwi. She asked why it said kiwi when it was a grapefruit. I really would have loved to see the look on the cashier's face. That's all I can remember. She's a barrel of laughs. Story 7. A country mile is longer than a city mile. I tried to reason with her for a short time, but sometimes you just have to let them think it. Story 8. It must be understood that if you can smell a fart after it passes through underwear and jeans, then an N95 mask is not effective against COVID-19. A fart is gas which has a much smaller molecular size than the virus. The virus spreads through water droplets that are significantly larger than gas molecules. Additionally, underwear and jeans are not as tightly woven as masks, which are designed with nearly microscopic fibers that can capture water particles effectively. Story 9. This is a waste of time. We are never going to use this, said during lifeguard training while learning how to save a drowning person. Story 10. Alaska is positioned slightly southwest of California, according to how inset maps often show it. Instead of considering that they might have read the map incorrectly, they were adamant that this was the case. Story 11. One of the reasons I left teaching was that I was working with a student after school for an extra math session. He told me that half of 50 is 0. I thought I had misheard him, so I asked him to repeat it, and he said, "Half of 50 is 0, right?" I corrected him and moved on. Later, in the teacher's lounge, another math teacher told me, "I know exactly what he did. He split the number in half vertically. Half of 50 is 5, and the other half is 0. That was when I knew I had to leave teaching for a while. There was no way I could think like that, and I felt like I could not help my students anymore. Story 12. During the height of COVID, there was a man at the gym loudly proclaiming that the vaccine was a plot by the government to gain mind control over people. I couldn't believe I was hearing this for real. Story 13. Back in 1992, I mentioned how I wanted to see Bram Stoker's Dracula when it was in theaters. A girlfriend of my friends spoke up and said, "Bram Stoker and Francis Ford Coppola haven't made a bad movie yet." I immediately replied, That's because Bram Stoker has been dead for around 80 years. Story 14. I don't know his name, but the guy who debated Sam Sater about government agencies receiving tax cuts. Story 15. I sometimes reflect on my philosophy class in school. Two particular statements still resonate with me today. One addressed the ethics of eating animals. A classmate shared her experience living near a pig farm, where she witnessed the miserable and cruel conditions in which the animals were kept. She concluded that the animals are better off dead than living in such suffering. However, she argued that once they are dead, there is no harm in consuming them. The other discussion focused on foreign aid and whether wealthy countries have an obligation to assist poorer nations. Another classmate suggested we should not help African countries because they are often governed by corrupt leaders. He argued that the populace supports these leaders, and if they were truly unhappy, they could simply initiate a revolution to replace the government with a better one. Story 16. A coworker asked for a tampon. I asked, regular or super? And she responded, oh gosh, just regular. My vagina is normal-sized. Story 17. In my 10th grade US history class, we discussed the space race. One student kept insisting the moon landing was faked because you can see in the video they have shadows, and there are no light bulbs on the moon. We initially thought he was joking, but he was not. Story 18. This year is a special year, once in a millennium. If you subtract your age from it, you will get the year you were born. Story 19. This was from a woman at the park where my kids always played. We weren't friends, but for a time we, along with several other women, were at the park together. The gist of her thoughts was as follows. 1. Doctors from long ago believed it was necessary to provide women with breast enhancements after having babies. This was considered necessary because breasts were thought to stop functioning after breastfeeding. This functioning had nothing to do with the ability to breastfeed. She couldn't explain how breasts stopped functioning. It was simply an accepted idea. She didn't know any women who had children and didn't get breast enhancements afterward. This woman had children. Her youngest was about 2. She asked other parents at the park with older kids where they had received their breast enhancements. As a side note, this woman appeared to have lived a challenging life. Story 20. Sasquatch can shrink or grow in size at will, teleport interdimensionally, and psychically interfere with electronic devices. They are reportedly used by the United States government to combat dogmen, which are not the same as werewolves. They are dogmen. Story 21. My brother-in-law said, we, the consumers, are not going to pay for the tariffs. Why would prices go up? Science needs to be accurate all the time. Why are they always changing? Are they not aware? Do they not understand how vaccines work? Story 22. Men are born to be naturally better pilots. That's why I would never fly with a female pilot, said my brother, an Andrew Tate superfan. However, aircraft are man-made devices and therefore are not naturally sourced. There is not a single cell in the male anatomy that supports aerodynamics. Story 23. One of my friends in college, who was a history major, told me that swords and armor did not exist until around 1100 AD. Story 24. That the Bible is absolutely historically accurate because the Bible is directly from God. He was serious. Story 25. The Mormon Church is true. I said it with confidence. Every member of my family said it with confidence. All my friends and neighbors growing up said it with confidence. Turns out we were all mistaken. Story 26. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Story 27. My friend drank so much that he started convulsing. He had to be taken to the emergency room. Story 28. When I worked at a pub restaurant, I had been off for a few days with a nasty flu. Upon my return, the usual ribbing from the chefs began, until one chef proudly announced without any sarcasm, "You can't have been that ill. I had the same thing and I wasn't that bad." You could hear a pin drop until the head chef said a few seconds later, "You're a complete moron," and went to do his stock take. Story 29. He refused a raise because it would put him in a higher tax bracket. resulting in higher taxes, meaning he would actually be earning less than before the raise. Story 30. One of my worst personality traits is not being able to let go when someone is confidently incorrect. Twice in my life, it has reached a point where I had to walk away when they wouldn't accept facts. 1. Shrimp isn't a significant source of fat. It is a lean protein. Pleather is patent leather, not plastic leather. These discussions were with two of my least favorite people I have ever known. Story 31. The earth was flat. A friend of my uncle who he works with was a pretty relaxed person. He mentioned it so casually that I felt like I did a genuine double take. I didn't want to make an issue of it at the family party, but it definitely lowered my expectations for him. Story 32. Why would I pay employees when I am not making money yet? I knew someone who was trying to start his own business and expected people to work for free until he was making money. Story 33. My father said that business monopolies are beneficial because they encourage small businesses to open and offer more affordable pricing for consumers. As a very successful business owner, my father should know better than that. Story 34. At a petting zoo. Child, pointing at animal. What's that? Mom. It's a kangaroo, you can tell by the ears. Story 35. A colleague told me that women cannot feel kidney stones because they can pass them easily, similar to giving birth. My father mentioned that my mother did not require surgery when her fallopian tubes were tied, as he believed a woman's organs come out during childbirth, allowing doctors to tie the tubes and then reposition them. Story 36. My mom was confused when I told her that vegetarians don't eat fish or chicken. She tried to tell me I was wrong for a minute, but I explained that vegetarians are like herbivores, meaning they don't eat meat. Story 37. We fought the Germans in World War II, said a 45-year-old coworker, a natural-born citizen of the United States and a lifelong resident of the New York City metropolitan area. Story 38. The junior high geography teacher said there weren't dry places in the world at elevations below sea level. At the same junior high, the health teacher promoted homeopathy as part of the class. Story 39. Shih Tzus do not require grooming. They do not get groomed when they are in the wild. Story 40. An ex-friend was very rude and arrogant. He snapped his fingers at a waiter and said, "Look at this dish. I ordered a beefsteak tomato salad. Do you see any beef or steak?" Story 41. As kids, my sister pointed out that she could see the moon during the day. My stepdad said, "It's not the moon. You can't see that during the day." My mom confidently replied, "When the sun goes down, the moon comes up." My sister and I looked at each other in disbelief, then back at the moon we could clearly see, and just shook our heads. Story 42. My cousin has shared some memorable stories over the years. Here are a few. He thought Australia, while we are in England, is at least 2 days ahead of us. So he believed he could travel, watch cricket, and call home to report the results and place bets without losing. It took nearly an hour to explain his mistakes and the 24-hour clock. When the National Aeronautics and Space Administration announced they had found signs of water on Mars, he literally thought it meant there were actual signs saying water this way. He suggested it would be fun to see how close one could get to the ground before pulling the cord on a parachute. He wondered if someone would have the courage to pull it 10 feet from the ground because he thought pulling the cord would make you spring back up, not realizing that the cameraman is still falling. He believes the moon landings are fake. He has visited Cape Canaveral and owns a Saturn V Lego set. I think he is also starting to believe in the flat Earth theory. His friends convinced him that camels laid eggs. Years later, when a few of us found out during an Xbox chat, he denied it, saying it was all lies. Later, he claimed, "Anyway, it wasn't camels, it was donkeys." Story 43. A high school history teacher and coach claimed that black people lived on the east side of town because it was closer to Africa and suggested they were faster runners than white people because they could levitate every other step while running fast. This occurred in the 1980s. Story 44. One testicle produced fighter sperm, while the other produced fertilizing sperm. The fighter sperm somehow went first, followed by the fertilizing sperm. Story 45. The government manipulates the weather specifically to target lower-income white families and prevent them from achieving economic upward mobility. He was completely serious and convinced that I was aware of all this as if it had been taught in first grade. Story 46. My sister was dating a man who confidently claimed that severe drug and alcohol addiction could be overcome by simply going to the gym. Fortunately, she ended the relationship the following week. As a community social worker, I was relieved that he wouldn't become part of our family. Story 47. She claimed to be 5 feet 6 inches tall when she was actually around my height, which is 5 feet 2 inches. She's just one of those people who can never be wrong in life. Story 48. Right after I pointed out that the moon was exceptionally bright for being in the middle of the day, he told me that you cannot see the moon during the day and that it was just a reflection. Story 49. Funny you should ask. My husband just went on a long rant about family matters, and he keeps saying that what his grandmother has is called old-timer's disease. To be fair, I used to think that's what it was called when I was 5. Story 50. Cancer has already been cured. They just don't want to let anyone know because it is more lucrative to treat cancer patients than to cure them. This was told to me with absolute certainty by 2 people in a conversation. Story 51. The moon and the sun are always on opposite sides of the earth, so you can never see them in the sky at the same time. Story 52. Those tires won't be that heavy when we ship them because I want you to remove 32 pounds of air from them first. I almost had an aneurysm. Story 53. I lived in a communal house for years, and one of my housemates was not very bright. One day, he told me he had read online that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration had discovered a new zodiac sign. I understand astronomy and astrology, but I didn't want to be pedantic, so I played along. The conversation kept getting stranger, and I didn't know what to say anymore when he asked how that would affect our horoscopes, as we would now have to divide the year into 13 parts. He mentioned he might have to change his zodiac sign, which he believed could completely change his life at 35 years old. Story 54. Touching a live electrical wire attached inside an electronic device with exposed copper would not electrocute a person because the current is directed to a source and not to the human body. Story 55. Overheard at Town Fair Tire. Do you know where Martha's Vineyard gets all its water? Comes from New Hampshire. Can you believe that? Travels through a pipe that runs under the ocean. Look it up. Story 56. While discussing politics, I pointed out that someone had incorrect information about a fact. They became angry and claimed they had the right to be misinformed and to choose to be misinformed. Story 57. 1. Batteries do not generate electricity. Years ago, when I worked at a store, business was very slow, so the manager, a young woman, and I decided to play 20 questions. She went first. I asked if the object used electricity, and she said no. We did not guess the object, which turned out to be a pager. I tried to explain to her that pagers do use electricity, but she was adamant that they operated on battery power, which, in her view, was not electricity. We never played 20 questions again. A year or so later, I was in training at another store and got into a discussion about gun control with a male coworker. I suggested we should use logic, and he responded that because people were often illogical, you could not use logic to uncover the truth about issues like gun control. Story 58. A friend of mine once confidently said to me, "What are you talking about? Women don't have urethras." I'm a woman. We have urethras. Story 59. Pasteurized milk comes from cows that are allowed in the pasture. I was unable to correct them because I was shocked. I think I said something like, "Are you sure?" Story 60. A couple of years ago, I heard a college student confidently tell his friends that it was inevitable that Kurt Cobain would take his own life because in the early 1990s, everyone was using heroin. I was in college in the early 1990s, and I am certain I never used heroin. Story 61. My father recently explained that meteors are the cause of all disease on Earth. When I paused and asked him to clarify that, he said the Black Death came from a meteor impact. When I tried to lightly explain that there was literally no evidence for that, he became very upset with me for wanting hard evidence about everything and said I needed to have more faith. He mentioned a newspaper from the 1500s that claimed a whole village saw the meteor, and that was that. I, for some reason, tried to illustrate that mass acceptance of something reported in a newspaper that I don't think existed wasn't exactly evidence of anything, especially since we can barely get news accurately reported right now. I tried to explain how an entire region in America burned and hunted women for being witches, which was most definitely reported in a newspaper, complete with made-up jobs to hunt those witches. I was then accused of being ignorant because witches have nothing to do with meteors and the Black Death. I hung up and haven't spoken to him in about a month, which is typical for most conversations. Mind you, I am a poor medic turned nursing student studying diseases, and he likes to remind me he makes 6 figures managing construction, which he believes is the measure of intelligence. Oh look, this whiskey just appeared in my hand. Story 62. 2 education majors were arguing that the world began 2013 years ago because nothing exists before 0. Future teachers. Current teachers. Story 63. Circumcision is practiced for the health benefits of both men and women. This was stated by a student on the last day of a sociology class I attended in college. Needless to say, the student faced criticism from classmates. I distinctly remember his defeated expression as he walked out of the classroom at the end of the class. Story 64. I can cure COVID without injecting you with poison. It's really easy and inexpensive too. I can also help you sell these small bottles of all natural oils, and you can earn money. What if I told you that you could also help others sell under you so you earn a portion of everything they sell? My very unconventional stepmother. Story 65. I heard an adult trying to explain to a biochemistry student that hiccups are caused by breathing and the heartbeat being out of sync. The biochemistry student did everything they could to avoid laughing in his face and attempted to guide him back a bit. But he insisted, "Yes, it is." This was the entirety of his argument. Story 66. I had someone tell me the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is not a federal agency because it is located in Atlanta. If it were a federal agency, it would be in the Washington, D.C. area. Story 67. My high school chemistry teacher made a comment that air gets denser as you go higher. I mistakenly corrected her, saying I thought she meant it gets less dense. She insisted on her point. I presented several supporting facts. Bags of chips and other groceries expand when purchased in the mountains. Planes can only fly so high. Helium balloons float because helium is less dense. She replied that all these occurrences happen because air gets denser. I eventually asked if air gets so dense that there's just a brick wall before reaching space. She replied, "You're just being difficult," and moved on. That's when I realized it was easier to just stay silent. Story 68. One time, the president of the most powerful country in the world told everyone they should drink bleach. Story 69. A month after the COVID-19 pandemic started, Donald J. Trump stated, "In a couple of months, COVID-19 is just going to magically float away." Story 70. Humans aren't animals. They don't run around in the wild. White people aren't of European descent. They are just white. Europeans are of European descent. Story 71. I was at my very racist grandfather's house one night a few years before he died. I don't remember how it came up or what we were talking about, but we were on the subject of Egypt. I must have mentioned something about Egypt being in Africa because my grandfather laughed and, very condescendingly, told me Egypt is not in Africa. I don't recall where he thought it was, probably the Middle East, but I told him Egypt is definitely in northeastern Africa. He eventually told me to go get his globe, as he had a rich collection with very old-fashioned decor. I got the globe and immediately pointed Egypt out to him. He then said the globe was wrong. Story 72. That Burt Reynolds was Ryan Reynolds' father, according to a friendly acquaintance. She was so certain that I dared not contradict her. She still walks around confidently believing this, and it makes me chuckle from time to time. Story 73. I will lower the price of groceries. I will end the war in Ukraine on day 1. You are going to win so much that you will get tired of winning. I am a stable genius. I will be the president at the Women's History Month event. Story 74. Make the United States great again. First, your country is not named America. Second, the United States was never great. It has always been about greed, racism, misogyny, and outright cruelty. If you want to be great, eliminate these issues instead of celebrating them. Story 75. I have heard people say things like, when I was a child, there was no such thing as autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or mental health issues. If anyone started that nonsense, the teachers would make sure it was beaten out of them. And they wonder why so many adults have issues now. Story 76. I watched Tulsi Gabbard testify under oath that there was no classified material discussed on Signal. Story 77. My first grade teacher passed out miniature American flags, telling us about 13 stripes and 50 stars, but because of Alaska and Hawaii, she said there are now 52 states. I felt absolutely humiliated for saying otherwise. I cried to my mom that night, and she thought I misheard my teacher. Weeks later, at the next parent-teacher conference, the teacher asked, "You mean there are only 50 states?" There was never an apology or acknowledgement in front of the class. I never could articulate how I could both have a completely broken spirit and lack respect for authority growing up. I also met an older person who insisted that the Monkees were a real band and that she saw them touring before the television show came out. For a couple of decades, no one could tell her otherwise. Story 78. To the question, if they ban abortion, who will take care of all the unwanted children? My adult lawyer friend replied, the Catholic Church. Story 79. My coworker went on a rant about how climate change is a hoax, stating that we live on a ball of magma, so of course the world is getting hotter. I didn't know what to say. Story 80. In Springfield, Haitian migrants are eating dogs and cats, stated President Donald J. Trump during a debate against Kamala Harris. Story 81. The absolute dumbest statement I've ever heard is that America is the greatest country in the world. What is great about America? The mass shootings? The fear-mongering? The fact that out of its 300 years of existence, only 12 years have been peaceful? The 50% incarceration rate? Mass deportations? White nationalists in government? Corporate healthcare? What truly makes America so great? Story 82. I was told by a friend that a girl in high school, when asked where ice comes from, responded confidently, "It comes from the fridge." Story 83. In boot camp, this individual told me the sky was a projection and that the sun and moon were just on a large screen. He was studying to become a meteorologist for naval warships. Story 84. I work in finance and accounting, and a coworker I was somewhat friends with outside of work refused to contribute to our company's 401k match. Essentially, it's free money, but he was convinced it was a bad idea because of taxes. I didn't understand his reasoning and thought to myself that he was heading down a poor path for retirement. He also boasted about playing pull tabs and spending money at the casino. Story 85. My sister was so sure tomorrow was spelled Tom-arrow that she made our dad come into the room to prove me wrong. He told us to stop bothering him over trivial matters, and I'm pretty sure she still thinks she was right. Story 86. I was high out of my mind during my freshman year of high school. Did you know there was once a North Korea and a South Korea? Story 87. Hold my beer. I know what I am doing, and it was me who said it right before I publicly demonstrated that I obviously did not know what I was doing. Story 88. YouTube personality Micah Stauffer said, decompose instead of decompress, and it will always be funny. Additionally, she rehomed a child she adopted, treating him like he was a puppy. Story 89. My advanced placement biology teacher used various logical fallacies, misinformation, and conspiracy theories to claim that evolution is incorrect. Additionally, he asserts that vaccines cause autism. Story 90. My brother's ex-girlfriend said that nipples grow back if you cut them off. She became very angry when my girlfriend at the time called her out on this. Story 91. The man who owned the boat I worked on bought a telescope to look at the stars from the boat. When he looked through the telescope, he realized there was too much sway on the boat to focus on anything so far away. That's when he suggested, let's bring it to the top deck. That way, it's closer and will be clearer. With complete confidence. I couldn't understand the lack of awareness. Story 92. Spain attracts significantly more tourists than Portugal. The reason is that Spain has a coastline, while Portugal is landlocked. Additionally, someone commented that people need to improve their understanding of history, stating that Ulysses S. Grant was a Confederate general. Story 93. I lived in the San Joaquin Valley in California for a time. This young man told me that the valley was formed by bulldozers pushing earth up into the mountains that surround the valley to make room for growing crops. These mountains are over 10,000 feet high. I thought he was joking and really committing to the act, so I laughed in his face. It would have been very funny if it had been a joke. But it wasn't. He was very hurt by my reaction. Story 94. That Kirby is a Pokemon, and she was sure of this because her son had a Pokemon card of him. Are you sure it wasn't Jigglypuff? No, it's Kirby. I have held on to this disagreement since I was 12. Story 95. Eggs are not a dairy food. She found them next to the cheese and milk in the supermarket where she shopped. Story 96. A schoolmate of mine got into a yelling match with me. She claimed she wasn't an animal. Our back and forth was mostly yes, you are, and no, I'm not. But I remember breaking through her nonsense when I asked her if she was a plant. To be fair, it was middle school. Story 97. One day in elementary school, as we came in from recess, I saw the moon during the day. Excitedly, I told the teacher because it looked fascinating. She confidently, in direct opposition to the visual evidence, told me that you cannot see the moon during the day. Story 98. My high school physics teacher gave me a detention for disagreeing with him when he claimed that opening your windows before a tornado saves your house. Story 99. From a former coworker. Racism ended when the slaves were freed, so the only reason we hear about it now is because black people keep bringing it up. What? Story 100. I had an argument with a man who worked at a beauty counter when he claimed that neutral pH was 5.5. I pointed out my chemistry degree, but that wasn't enough to convince him. In the end, I realized it was like playing chess with a pigeon. Story 101. I was talking to a guy once, and he said that if his company really takes him to Mars, then the snail won't be able to find him. Story 102. I sailed with a man who claimed that Alcatraz Island was a floating piece of pumice rock attached to the ocean floor by chains. This is a very intelligent and educated individual. Story 103. Ham radio gets its name from the term ham, which refers to amateur radio operators. Story 104. I had a conversation with someone I thought was rational and coherent. Then they shared their idea that black people evolved from monkeys and white people evolved from fish. He was dead serious. Story 105. NASA is misleading us about space and cosmology because the photos they take are not authentic and the colors need to be edited. I had a 45-minute discussion with one of my best friends, who is an adult, about this. Some people will go to great lengths to be controversial or reject mainstream beliefs to the point where they believe unreasonable things simply to be contrarian. Story 106. I met a person who confidently stated that dinosaurs aren't real and are just made for cartoons. Story 107, 4th grade. 60-year-old teacher's aide. Chicago is a state like New York. Me. No, Miss Marie, Chicago is a city. 60-year-old teacher's aide. Don't say that I am wrong. I know that Chicago is a state, not a city. Story 108. I helped people who were stuck alongside the McDonald's drive-thru trying to start their car. I could see by the headlights that they were losing battery power with each crank. I got out, offered to charge their battery with jumper cables, and retrieved the cables. I hooked up the battery, and the wait began. It usually takes some time, and I could see the battery was struggling because their lights barely lit with the last crank. I told them to let the battery charge for a few minutes. 30 seconds later, she tried again. The lights were bright, but the car wouldn't start. I said to wait a bit longer. It takes time to get enough charge to start the car. 30 seconds later, she tried again. Frustrating. She and her passenger got out, and the passenger said, "It's her Cadillac converter." I told her it's her Cadillac converter, but she didn't believe me. It's not her battery. I simply replied, "Yes, call a tow truck." Sorry, I did all I could. And I left. Of course, I assumed she meant catalytic converter, which is a part of the exhaust system and has absolutely nothing to do with the car being unable to start its engine. Also, it was most definitely not a Cadillac I was trying to help get started. Story 109. A friend's dad was trying to remove an axle from an all-terrain vehicle. He pulled out the blowtorch and began heating the axle. Shouldn't you heat the housing around it? Heat expands. Cold shrinks. No, it doesn't. Heat shrinks. Ever heard of heat shrink? How about when a water bottle explodes in the freezer? I honestly didn't have a response to this at the time, considering that I was in middle school and he was technically right about those two things. We never rode that all-terrain vehicle again. Story 110. I had a friend who thought limes and lemons were the same fruit. Even better, we were shopping in the supermarket, looking at one pile of fruit labeled limes and another labeled lemons. He thought limes were just less ripe lemons. Story 111. If you work for free this one time, they will respect you more and ensure they pay you for your work next time. Story 112. My best friend, a college graduate and an F-35 pilot in the Air Force, once insisted that Colorado was spelled Colorado. I was amazed when he told me he didn't know there was an L in the name of that state. This friend does not have a speech impediment. Story 113. That Tillamook cheese is made in Oregon, which wouldn't have been a big deal if he had accepted he was wrong. Even when I told him I'd been to the factory, he didn't back down and insisted I was wrong. The next time I drove by the factory, I sent him a photo. Story 114. At work, a colleague shared details about her trip to New York, including what she did and saw. She mentioned, "We went to Ground Zero, and it was really impressive." Another colleague replied, "Ground Zero? Is that a club?" Story 115. You cannot get pregnant by sleeping with a gay man. This statement is made by a woman regarding women, not implying that men cannot become pregnant together. Story 116. They can tolerate colder temperatures because they grew up in the Northeast, so their blood is thicker. Story 117. I knew someone who confidently stated that Vikings were the first to reach the Americas before the natives. Story 118. Your research is somewhat redundant because we already know everything there is to know about female physiology at this point. Story 119. Don't worry. The sidewall of the tire indicates a maximum of 55 psi. Putting it at 80 psi will be fine. This advice was given to me by a younger manager at an automotive repair shop. I have been a professional automotive technician for 19 years, holding ASE Master and Ford Senior Master certifications in gas and diesel. Unfortunately, it took getting the shop owner involved, but I won the argument. Story 120. Overheard someone saying that the pyramids were made by aliens because they are 4,000 years old, which is older than the Earth. Story 121. She made me bleed, and what if I get AIDS from it? My best friend throughout grade school. Ironically, she said this while we were sitting in science class. This was the early 2000s, and I was in grade 7. Story 122. As a boiling kettle spews steam into my kitchen cabinets, I remind myself, it's just air. It won't hurt anything. Story 123. I once asked my sister what percentage of men she thought were 7 feet tall or taller. She responded with 10%. Story 124. A girl I worked with was convinced that the baby she was carrying wasn't hers because her partner cheated on her. She believed the baby belonged to the affair partner, especially since it was a boy and she wanted a girl. When she gave birth, she had a paternity test to make sure the baby was hers. Newsflash. It was hers. We tried to explain that it couldn't work like that, but she wouldn't believe us. In the end, we catered to her misguided belief, which was quite amusing. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.